Flight 227, the pilot who vanished at 35,000 feet. Captain Michael Torres had been flying for 23 years, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen on Flight 227, a routine 6-hour journey that would become the most inexplicable event in aviation history. And I need you to hear this story because what happened up there, 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, will change the way you think about sacrifice, duty, and the invisible threads that connect us all. It was March 15th, a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with Michael kissing his daughter Emma goodbye at 5 a.m., promising her he'd be home in time for her school play that evening. Not knowing that promise would lead him to make an impossible choice that would haunt everyone who knew him. Emma was 12, bright-eyed and brilliant. The kind of kid who still believed her father was invincible, who still ran to the door when she heard his car in the driveway. And Michael lived for those moments because 3 years earlier, his wife Sarah had lost her battle with cancer, leaving him to raise Emma alone, to be both mother and father, to fill a void that could never truly be filled. He carried a photo of them in his wallet, taken at Emma's 9th birthday, Sarah's arm around her, both of them laughing at something he'd said. And sometimes in the cockpit, during those long stretches over empty ocean, he'd take it out and just look at it, remembering what he was working for, what he was living for. Flight 227 was a Boeing 777 carrying 347 passengers from Los Angeles to Tokyo, and Michael's co-pilot that day was a young officer named Daniel Chun, only 26 years old, on just his 15th international flight. Nervous but capable, the kind of pilot who double-checked everything, who took his responsibilities seriously. The flight took off at 6:47 a.m., climbing smoothly into a clear California sky, passengers settling in with their movies and meals, completely unaware that their captain was about to face a crisis that would test every fiber of his being. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the vast emptiness of the Pacific, the first indicator light flickered on the instrument panel, a small yellow warning that made Michael lean forward, his trained eyes scanning the systems. And within seconds, more lights began appearing, red ones this time, accompanied by a soft but urgent beeping that made Daniel's face go pale. The hydraulic system was failing, not just one line, but all 3 backup systems simultaneously, something that wasn't supposed to be possible, something that the engineers said had a probability of 1 in 10 billion. But there it was, happening in real time as the aircraft continued to hurtle through the sky at 500 miles per hour. Michael's hands moved with practiced precision, his voice calm as he radioed air traffic control. LAX Center, Flight 227, we have multiple hydraulic failures, requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing. But even as he said it, he knew what the computer was already telling him. They were 1,500 miles from the nearest airfield, too far to glide, too far to make it on failing systems that were degrading by the minute. The passengers still didn't know, still sat in their seats watching movies, reading books, some sleeping peacefully, while in the cockpit, 2 men stared at instruments that were telling them an impossible truth. This aircraft, with its 347 souls on board, was dying in the sky. Daniel's voice cracked when he spoke. "Captain, the manual says if we lose all hydraulic pressure, we have maybe 30 minutes before we lose all control surfaces." And Michael nodded, his mind already racing through scenarios, calculations, possibilities that all led to the same terrible conclusion. But then, as Michael was about to make the announcement that would send the cabin into chaos, something extraordinary happened. The plane began to stabilize, the shuttering stopped, the warning lights blinked once, and then held steady. Not fixed, but not deteriorating either, as if something or someone had reached out and was holding the aircraft together through sheer force of will. Daniel looked at Michael with confusion and hope. "Sir, the degradation rate just dropped to near zero. It's like something is compensating for the hydraulic loss. But that's impossible. There's no system that can do that." and Michael stared at his controls, feeling something he'd never felt before in 23 years of flying. The plane was responding to him differently, almost intuitively, as if it knew what he needed before he moved the controls. Air traffic control came back on the radio. Flight 227, we're showing your telemetry stabilizing. Can you confirm your status? And Michael, his voice steady despite the impossibility of what he was experiencing, replied, "Confirmed, we have partial control restored through unknown means. Continuing to monitor, but we need to get this aircraft on the ground as soon as possible." The nearest suitable airport was still over an hour away, a military base in the Aleutian Islands that had agreed to clear their runway for an emergency landing. And Michael knew that every minute they stayed airborne was a minute closer to catastrophe. But the plane kept flying, kept responding, kept defying everything he knew about aeronautics and physics. 30 minutes passed, then 45, and the aircraft continued to hold together, the passengers still unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, and Michael made the decision not to tell them, not to cause panic when there was still hope, still a chance they could all walk away from this. Daniel was monitoring every system, calling out readings, his young voice gaining confidence as the minutes ticked by without further deterioration. And Michael felt something swell in his chest, a fierce determination mixed with gratitude for whatever miracle was keeping them alive. But then, at the 53-minute mark, just as the Aleutian Islands appeared on the horizon like a promise of salvation, the impossible happened. The main flight computer suddenly displayed a message that made both pilots' blood run cold. Critical system override engaged. Manual control required. Autopilot disengaging in 60 seconds. Michael's hands gripped the controls as the autopilot disconnected, and suddenly he could feel the full weight of the dying aircraft, could feel it wanting to fall, to give in to gravity and physics. And he realized with horrifying clarity that whatever had been helping them, whatever impossible, had taken everything it had to get them this far, and now it was Michael's turn to bring them home. His arms strained against the controls, every muscle in his body engaged in a battle against an aircraft that weighed nearly 600,000 pounds and wanted to drop from the sky, and Daniel was calling out altitude, speed, heading, his voice the only thing anchoring Michael to reality. As sweat poured down his face and his vision began to narrow with the physical effort of keeping the plane level. 3,000 feet, Captain, runway in sight. You're doing it, just a little more. Daniel's voice broke with emotion, and Michael could see the runway now, could see the emergency vehicles lined up, the foam on the tarmac, salvation just minutes away. But then the aircraft shuddered violently, and a new alarm screamed through the cockpit. They were losing engine power now too, the cascade failure spreading to systems that had been fine moments before. Michael knew with absolute certainty that they had seconds, not minutes, before this became unsurvivable. 2,000 feet, 1,500, the ground rushing up to meet them, and Michael's arms were on fire, his whole body screaming in agony as he fought the controls. And then something inside him shifted, some decision made in a place deeper than thought or reason. And he turned to Daniel and said 6 words that would echo through aviation history. Get ready to take the controls. Daniel's eyes went wide. Sir, what are you? But Michael cut him off, his voice filled with a calm certainty that came from somewhere beyond himself. When I tell you, you're going to take over. You're going to land this plane. You're going to get everyone home safe. Do you understand me? And Daniel, tears streaming down his young face, nodded. 1,000 feet, and Michael could feel it now, could feel what needed to happen, could feel the plane demanding something from him that no manual had ever described, no training had ever prepared him for. It needed a focus, a single point of absolute will and intention, and he knew that. Daniel could land it. The passengers could live, Emma could grow up and have a life she deserved. Now, Daniel, take it now. Michael's voice was the last thing recorded on the cockpit voice recorder before something inexplicable happened. Every instrument on the plane showed Captain Michael Torres' vital signs flatline, showed his seatbelt still fastened, his body still in the captain's chai. And yet the aircraft suddenly stabilized completely, flying with an impossible smoothness as Daniel, guided by muscle memory and instinct and perhaps something more, brought Flight 227 down onto that runway in what investigators would later call the smoothest emergency landing they'd ever reviewed. The plane rolled to a stop. Emergency crews rushed forward. Passengers began to evacuate in orderly fashion. Not one injury among them. Not one scratch. A perfect outcome to an impossible situation. And when the first responders reached the cockpit, they found Daniel Chun sobbing over the body of Captain Michael Torres, who had no pulse, no breathing, no signs of life, despite having no visible injuries, no medical explanation for his death. He had simply stopped, as if he had given everything he had, every last spark of energy in life, to hold that plane together long enough for everyone else to survive. The investigation took months, and the final report was the strangest document in FAA history. It confirmed the hydraulic failures, confirmed the cascade of system breakdowns, confirmed that by every known principle of aviation, Flight 227 should have fallen. From the sky over the Pacific Ocean, killing everyone on board, but instead it had flown, had held together through what investigators could only describe as unknown means. And when they examined the flight data recorder for the final minutes, they found something that made even the most hardened skeptics pause. The aircraft's control inputs showed precision and coordination that would have required dozens of hydraulic systems. Functioning perfectly, coming from a plane that had nanias if the captain himself had become part of the aircraft, had merged his will with its structure, had literally held it together through force of intention until his body could give no more. At Michael Torres' funeral, attended by every passenger from Flight 227, Daniel Chun gave a eulogy through tears, describing a captain who had taught him in their brief time together that being a pilot wasn't just about flying a plane. It was about understanding that every decision, every action, every moment in that cockpit was a sacred trust with the lives depending on you. And when the ultimate test came, Michael had proven that some people are capable of giving literally everything, of transcending the boundaries between possible and impossible, between living and sacrifice, to fulfill that trust. Emma Torres, 12 years old, and wearing her school play costume because she'd insisted her father would have wanted her to perform that night, stood at the grave and placed her hand on the coffin, whispering words that only she and the memory of her father would ever know. Later, investigators found in Michael's wallet not just the photo of Sarah and Emma, but a small note written in his hand, dated the morning of the flight. If Emma is reading this, know that every choice Daddy ever made was to give you a. Remember that love doesn't end. It just changes form world worth living in. And if I'm not there to see you grow up, it becomes the wind that holds up the wings, the invisible force that keeps us all flying even when we can't see how. The aviation world struggled to explain what happened on Flight 227, struggled to fit it into their understanding of physics and mechanics and systems. But Emma knew, and Daniel knew, and somewhere deep down, every passenger who walked away from that plane alive knew. They had witnessed something that transcended explanation, had been saved by a man who loved his daughter so much that when faced with an impossible choice, he found a way to keep his promise, to get everyone home safe, even if he couldn't come home himself. Years later, Daniel Chun, now a captain himself, would tell his own co-pilots about Flight 227, about the day he learned that the most important instrument in any cockpit isn't on the panel, it's in the heart, and that sometimes the greatest act of strength isn't holding on. It's letting go at exactly the right moment so others can live. And here's what I need you to understand what this story is really about. We all face moments where we have to choose between our own comfort and someone else's survival, between the easy path and the right one. And most of us never have to make a choice as dramatic as Captain Torres, but we make smaller versions of it every single day. Michael Torres didn't plan to when we decide whether to stay late and help a colleague, whether to sacrifice our time for our children, whether to give our energy to making someone else's life better even when we're exhausted ourselves, to become a hero. Didn't wake up that morning knowing give his life. He was just a father trying to get home to his daughter's school play. But when the moment came, when everything fell apart at 35,000 feet, he didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the cost to himself. He simply did what needed to be done because that's what love looks like when it's tested by fire. That's what integrity means when everything is on the line. That's what it means to be human in the deepest, most profound sense. The willingness to pour ourselves out completely for others, to become the bridge they walk across to safety, even if we can't cross it ourselves. The truth that haunted investigators and inspired pilots and changed Daniel Chen's life forever was this. Captain Michael Torres proved that there are forces in this universe stronger than hydraulics and engines and metal. Forces that can hold things together when every physical law says they should break apart. And those forces are will and love and the unbreakable determination to protect what matters most. And while we may never understand exactly how he kept that plane flying, we know why. Because 347 people needed to get home.